Joe Rogan sat down with comedian and political commentator Dave Smith. And what followed was one of those classic marathon conversations where the humor fades quickly into serious talk about fear, war, media, and the everyday struggles of regular people. If you've ever wondered why politics feels broken, why the economy seems stacked against you, and why the media can't be trusted, this episode has it all. Let's break down 3 hours of back and forth into 10 minutes. They start off laughing about the criticism Dave gets all the time. Why should anyone listen to you? You're just a comedian. Dave doesn't shy away from it. He points out that the institutions we're supposed to trust, governments, think tanks, mainstream media, even experts in specialized fields, get things wrong constantly. And because comedians aren't part of that establishment, they have the freedom to say what others are afraid to. Joe jumps in with his own example from MMA. Even the so-called experts miss obvious things in fights. Status, titles, or degrees don't guarantee truth. Sometimes being outside the system lets you see reality more clearly. From there, the conversation shifts to one of the most powerful forces in society: fear. They trace a direct line between the wave of fear after 9/11 and the wave of fear during COVID. After the terrorist attacks, Americans lived under color-coded terror alerts. People accepted the Patriot Act, warrantless surveillance, and wars that stretched across the Middle East. Why? Because they were scared. Fast forward 20 years, and during COVID, the same playbook was used. Dave points out that even top health officials admitted they leaned into fear deliberately because it kept people compliant. But fear does more than just get compliance. It kills rational thought, fuels division, and leads to policies that almost nobody would accept in calmer times. Joe adds that fear is a drug. It hijacks the mind. It makes people hand over authority without asking questions, and by the time they realize it, it's too late. That naturally leads to the media. How does fear spread? Through endless stories, repeated again and again until they become truth. Governments feed narratives, think tanks package them, corporate media amplifies them, and social media multiplies the noise. Dave explains how once a label gets attached to you, denier, conspiracy theorist, anti-science, the conversation is over. Joe agrees. Once the crowd decides you're on the wrong side, nuance doesn't matter anymore. The whole idea of a democracy with debate and discussion collapses into team sports. People aren't listening to arguments, they're cheering for jerseys, and that takes them right into foreign policy. Dave doesn't hold back when he talks about the neoconservative strategy of using endless war as a way to keep America dominant. Iraq, he says, wasn't just a mistake, it was the unforgivable one. Sold on lies, justified as a noble mission, it destabilized an entire region and cost trillions of dollars. Yet the pattern kept repeating. Libya, Syria, Yemen. Each time, politicians sold the war as humanitarian. Each time, the outcome was destruction and chaos. Joe shakes his head at how quickly Americans tuned out. Wars became background noise, another story scrolling by while the real cost was hidden from view. Ukraine is the freshest example, and the conversation gets heavy here. Dave argues that in 2022, outlines of a peace deal actually existed, but those negotiations collapsed, in part because of Western pressure to keep fighting. Now, years later, the best-case outcomes being floated look almost identical to those early drafts, except now with massive casualties and entire cities destroyed. Joe questions whether NATO promises are helping or just keeping the fire alive. Both of them circle back to the same theme. The incentives are upside down. Leaders gain power and money by prolonging conflict, not by ending it. The heart of the podcast comes when they connect war to money. Dave draws the line back to 1971, when Nixon ended the gold standard. That moment unleashed an era of unlimited government spending and money printing. Suddenly, funding a war didn't require raising taxes honestly. You could just print. The debt soared, the dollar weakened, and inflation slowly crept into every corner of life. But while the elites were buying assets that soared in value, the working class was left to deal with rising prices. Joe brings it back to the kitchen table. Groceries up 30%, rent insane, childcare impossible. That's not a statistic. That's people's daily lives. Policy decisions in Washington aren't abstract. They decide whether you can afford to feed your kids or pay your bills. They spend time talking about the psychological cost, too. Inflation isn't just economic, it's human. Families crack under the pressure. Marriages fall apart. Stress and anxiety climb. Communities weaken. Dave reminds Joe that even when bombs aren't dropping on your city, policies still create victims. The system quietly transfers wealth upward, and regular people feel crushed. And while politicians argue about GDP and growth, the lived reality is despair. Toward the close, Joe and Dave talk about how truth itself gets manufactured. They bring up the mythology of Watergate, the story we're told about noble journalists bringing down a corrupt president. But in reality, it was just as much about which parts of the story were amplified and which parts were hidden. Fast forward to today, and the same thing happens constantly. Narratives are created, polished, and packaged to serve power. The lesson isn't that everything is a lie. The lesson is to be skeptical. Don't fall into blind cynicism, but don't swallow the official line either. Verify, question, and look at who benefits from the story being told. By the end, the message is clear. Fear makes control easy. Media makes control look noble. And the bill always comes to you. Whether it's higher grocery prices, endless wars paid with your taxes, or freedoms slowly stripped away. That's what Joe and Dave hammer home. The people at the top create the narratives, but ordinary people always pay the price. This conversation wasn't just about politics, it was about power and about the human cost of systems that pretend to protect you while actually exploiting you. If you want to understand why things feel so off in modern life, this episode lays it bare. And if you found this recap valuable, hit subscribe. I'll keep bringing you episode in 10 minutes breakdowns so you never miss the big picture, even if you don't have 3 hours to spare.